Hey everyone! Tonight we begin with the extremely chaotic story of Julius Caesar's assassination, also known as what happens when your coworkers hate you just enough before you get comfortable. Take a moment, like the video, and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Long before Julius Caesar decided to upgrade Roman politics, the Roman Republic loved telling everyone how healthy and functional it was. Senators boasted that their ancient system of checks and balances kept everything stable. In reality, by the 1st century BCE, the Republic was about as stable as a three-legged table on a slanted floor during an earthquake. But sure-stable. Rome had expanded into a massive empire. Yet, its political system remained the same fragile antique built for a city-state. Imagine running a global corporation using a rulebook designed for a lemonade stand. That was Rome. The Senate kept insisting nothing was wrong, while entire provinces caught fire in the background. Corruption everywhere, bribery a lifestyle. Political alliances dissolved quicker than a Roman marriage, with no dowry involved. Senators switched loyalties so often that even they couldn't keep track of who they were betraying on any given Tuesday. The Republic wasn't dying, it was performing a very dramatic, very unconvincing impression of being alive. Enter Julius Caesar. Charismatic, ambitious, terrifyingly competent, and possessing more political energy than an entire Senate full of men who hadn't seen a battlefield since their last hunting accident. Caesar didn't politely join the system. He crash-landed into it with reforms, popularity, and an ego large enough to be visible from Gaul. To ordinary Romans, he was the hero they didn't know they needed. He lowered debts, handed out land, expanded citizenship, and threw lavish public games because nothing wins hearts like free entertainment. The people adored him so much that the Senate began experiencing symptoms of a previously unknown medical condition called widespread panic to the Senate. Caesar was a walking red flag, not because he was dangerous, though he was, but because he was effective. Roman politicians were used to colleagues who achieved very little over long periods of time. Caesar achieved everything over breakfast. He didn't just challenge the old political order. He exposed how flimsy it was. The Republic's institutions weren't collapsing because Caesar attacked them. They were collapsing because Caesar leaned on them slightly, and suddenly, everyone heard cracking sounds. The senators realized something terrifying. Caesar wasn't trying to destroy the Republic. He was simply showing how destroyed it already was, and nothing threatens an old, crumbling system more than a man who proves it's crumbling. Before Julius Caesar became Rome's biggest political problem, he was Rome's biggest overachiever, the kind of guy who doesn't just complete the assignment but redesigns the rubric, rewrites the syllabus, and wins Teacher of the Year. If Rome had a most likely to accidentally become supreme ruler award, Caesar would have hung it on his wall next to his military trophies. Caesar wasn't born powerful. He built everything himself: reputation, wealth, alliances, and enemies. Lots of enemies. He climbed the Roman political ladder so aggressively that the ladder filed a workplace complaint By the time he reached his mid-career, Caesar had everything. Senators feared in one person: ambition, intelligence, charisma, military genius, and the ability to make the public love him without even trying. A modern politician would kill for that skill. Senators in Caesar's time literally did. But what truly made Caesar dangerous wasn't just his talent. It was the shocking fact that he delivered results. While most Roman politicians specialized in speeches that said nothing and accomplished even less, Caesar went out, conquered Gaul, wrote a bestseller about it, and sent the Senate updates that basically said, "Still winning. Wish you were here." His military campaigns were so wildly successful that Rome ran out of ways to brag about him. Meanwhile, his soldiers adored him because he shared their hardships, won their battles, and didn't make them do PowerPoint presentations. They marched with him not out of duty, but because he was the kind of commander you'd actually follow into a war zone, or at least into a mildly concerning forest. The problem: no man in Roman history had ever become that popular that quickly, and nothing alarms politicians faster than someone the public likes more than them. Caesar's victories gave him massive wealth, unmatched influence, and legions of loyal soldiers, which, from the Senate's perspective, was basically a checklist for potential future dictator. The Senate wanted generals who remained humble, controllable, and preferably far away. Caesar was none of these things. He was successful, charismatic, and dangerously close to being unstoppable. By the time Caesar finished conquering Gaul, he didn't just return to Rome with treasure and glory. He returned with momentum, dangerous momentum, the kind of momentum that made senators wake up at night in cold sweats, whispering, "Please, Jupiter, let him retire quietly, or at least move to Spain." But Caesar wasn't retiring. He wasn't slowing down. He was only getting started, and Rome was not ready. By 50 BCE, Julius Caesar had achieved something truly dangerous in Roman politics. He became too successful to ignore and too powerful to control. The Senate tried to contain him the way you might try to contain a tornado with a bedsheet. Caesar had armies, victories, popularity, and ambition, which in Roman political terms is the same as writing, "Please exile or assassinate me on your forehead." The Senate's solution was simple: order Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome alone, without the legions that adored him. They essentially said, "Come back unarmed. We promise we won't hurt you." Caesar, being smart, recognized this as the political equivalent of, "Come into the alley. We just want to talk." Meanwhile, Caesar's enemies Pompey and the Optimates gathered in Rome, sharpening their legal daggers, salivating at the prospect of prosecuting him the moment he stepped foot in the city. Not because he was guilty of anything, well, he was, but so was every senator, but because eliminating Caesar would restore their power. They feared him not for his crimes, but because no one looked good standing next to Caesar. So Caesar stood at the edge of the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, staring across the water like a man contemplating whether to press send on a dangerously honest text message. Roman law was clear. A general crossing into Italy with an army was treason. Automatic, civil, war, instant chaos, zero takebacks. Caesar paused, took in the moment, and then crossed anyway. Legend says he uttered "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. A more accurate translation might be, "Well, here we go." With that single step, Caesar declared open defiance. The Senate panicked. Pompey panicked. Basically, everyone, except Caesar, panicked. And Caesar didn't panic because he had something Rome feared most: confidence backed by competence. As he marched south, cities surrendered instantly. Many welcomed him. Others hid behind curtains, pretending not to be home. Caesar wasn't just crossing a river, he was crossing into political immortality. This moment shattered the illusion that the Republic was in control. Caesar made it clear: if the Senate wanted a fight, he'd give them one and he would win. The Rubicon wasn't just a river, it was Rome's last warning, and Caesar stepped over it like a man late for his destiny. Once Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the Roman political class collectively entered what historians call severe meltdown mode. Their plan to intimidate Caesar into surrendering failed instantly, mostly because Caesar refused to act like a man who knew he was supposed to lose. Meanwhile, Pompeius Magnus Pompey the Great stepped forward as Rome's designated hero, which sounded impressive. Except Pompey was no longer the unstoppable general he once was. By this point, Pompey was Rome's version of a retired celebrity trying to make a comeback tour. Pompey had seniority, prestige, and a resume full of conquered continents. But he lacked one crucial thing: momentum. Caesar had just spent 10 years winning battles in Gaul. Pompey had spent the same 10 years winning Senate arguments and avoiding paperwork. These were not equally transferable skills. Still, the Senate placed all its hopes on him. They handed Pompey command of Rome's armies and said, "Fix this." Pompey, realizing he was not emotionally prepared to fight Caesar on short notice, did what any self-respecting military leader would do. He evacuated Rome immediately and told everyone it was part of the strategy. His grand plan: retreat to Greece, gather reinforcements, and fight Caesar from a safe distance. Ideally, a very safe distance. Caesar didn't need to gather reinforcements. His soldiers were already with him, ready to win wars before breakfast. So he marched across Italy like he was strolling through his own backyard, collecting supporters as easily as a medieval influencer. The showdown came at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Pompey had the numbers, the Senate's backing, and theoretically a better position. Caesar had experience, adaptability, and an army that had been winning so consistently they probably forgot how to lose. It wasn't a battle. It was a live demonstration of what happens when discipline fights indecision. Pompey's forces collapsed. Caesar won decisively. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for safety only to be greeted by a The Egyptians killed him, presented his head to Caesar, and expected applause. Caesar did not clap. Pompey's death wasn't a victory. It was the end of an era. The Senate's old guard lost their champion, their stability, and their last illusion of control. With Pompey gone, Caesar stood alone at the top. No rivals, no counterweight, no brakes on the vehicle he was driving, straight into Roman history. The Republic hadn't fallen yet, but it had definitely started wobbling after Pompey's spectacularly unfortunate exit from world history. Julius Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed champion of, well, everything, and the Senate, realizing they now had all the negotiating power of a wet sponge, tried their best to adapt. Their new political strategy was simple: pretend they were still in charge while giving Caesar every title he asked for. At first, they made him dictator, which was fine. Rome allowed temporary dictators during emergencies. But the emergencies kept mysteriously continuing, mostly because Caesar kept winning wars, fixing problems, and reorganizing the state in ways that made the Senate feel useless. So, they made him dictator again. It became a running joke. Oh, another crisis. Better give Caesar absolute power until it's sorted. The Senate was basically auto-renewing his subscription. Then came the final promotion. Dictator perpetuoed, dictator for life. This was the political equivalent of slapping a "yes, I am basically king" sticker on Caesar's forehead and telling the Senate to be cool about it. To Caesar, this new title made perfect sense. He needed uninterrupted authority to rebuild a republic that was collapsing faster than a badly constructed Roman roof. He wanted stability, efficiency, and the ability to make decisions without asking permission from 50 men who couldn't agree on lunch. To everyone else, this title was a flashing neon sign reading, "Monarchy incoming." Romans hated kings with a passion normally reserved for tax collectors and people who cut in line. Their entire national identity was built on not having a king. You could threaten Romans with famine, war, or plague and they'd hold steady. But whisper "Rex King" and they'd sprint into the streets, screaming. So when Caesar sat on a golden chair, wore special robes, got his own month in the calendar, and had statues of himself placed next to the gods, let's just say perceptions were not great. Some senators saw ambition turning into dominance. Others saw dominance turning into tyranny. All of them saw their personal influence evaporating like cheap wine in the summer. The Senate began imagining a future where Caesar ruled indefinitely, where their power shrank to decorative, and the Republic became a museum exhibit labeled, "Look what we used to have." The idea of Caesar as dictator for life didn't just frighten them. It convinced them that if they didn't act soon, they would become irrelevant relics of a political system Caesar was already reinventing. And nothing terrifies a politician more than irrelevance. If there was one word that could send Romans into a full psychological meltdown, it was king. Romans feared kings the way modern people fear unexpected phone calls with immediate suspicion and the urge to flee. The entire Roman Republic was built on the proud memory of kicking out their last king centuries earlier. They didn't just dislike monarchy, they treated it like a hereditary curse. So when Julius Caesar began acting a little too regal, senators started sweating through their togas like they were trapped in a sauna staffed by their political enemies. To be fair, Caesar didn't wake up one morning and declare, "I am your king now. Deal with it." He wasn't an idiot, but he did accumulate honors with such enthusiasm that Rome began to look less like a republic and more like a launch monarchy. It began subtly, a special chair here, a fancy robe there, a statue placed among the gods, a month named after him. Classic humble behavior. The Senate kept handing him honors because telling Caesar no was increasingly hazardous to one's career longevity, and Caesar being Caesar accepted everything. Why not? If people want to hand you symbols of divine authority, declining them feels almost rude. But to everyday Romans, these honors were raising red flags the size of naval sails. Then came the infamous Lupercalia incident. During a lively public festival full of running, shouting, and ritual weirdness, Mark Antony dramatically tried to place a royal crown on Caesar's head. The crowd reacted instantly, not with cheers, but with the ancient Roman equivalent of absolutely not. Caesar theatrically refused the crown twice, as if auditioning for the role of reluctant monarch who totally isn't enjoying the suspense. But the damage was done. The people didn't trust Antony's performance, and the Senate didn't trust Caesar's refusal. Everyone saw it for what it was, a test balloon to see how Rome felt about crowns. Spoiler: Rome hated crowns. Rumors exploded across the city. Caesar wanted to be king. Caesar planned to make Rome a monarchy. Caesar would soon rule like the old tyrants. It didn't matter whether the rumors were true. Political fear works faster than political truth. Senators, already worried about Caesar's growing power, now saw him as a man drifting dangerously close to the one taboo Rome could not tolerate. The Republic survived corruption, civil wars, riots, and endless incompetence. But a king, that was the final straw to them. Caesar wasn't just becoming powerful, he was becoming unruly, and that, in their minds, was a crime worthy of steel. If Rome had an unofficial motto during Caesar's rise, it was, "We love powerful men until they actually become powerful." The Senate was full of aristocrats who adored prestige but despised competition. Their egos were huge, their accomplishments modest, and their tolerance for anyone outperforming them was approximately zero. Enter Julius Caesar, man who made every senator look like they had been running Rome autopilot for the past 50 years. The Senate didn't just fear losing political control, they feared losing relevance. And in a world where public honor was the currency of existence, irrelevance was a fate worse than bankruptcy. Caesar's victories made the Senate's achievements look like glorified internship credits. Worse, Caesar began doing the unthinkable. He bypassed the Senate entirely when solving problems. When senators stalled, Caesar acted. When they bickered, Caesar delivered. When they wrote long speeches criticizing him, Caesar wrote short laws that replaced them. He made the machinery of government move again, which was great for Rome, but deeply inconvenient for men who preferred the machinery rusted, jammed, and under their control. This is where the Senate's ego kicked in hard. Some senators genuinely believed Caesar threatened the Republic. Others were upset that they weren't getting invited to the good banquets anymore. Many feared that Caesar's popularity with the masses meant their political opinions were becoming optional, like the fine print on a loan contract. Even worse, Caesar forgave his enemies. This act of mercy meant to unify Rome only terrified them further. A forgiven enemy is not a safe enemy. It's a man who knows you owe him your life and can take it back whenever he chooses. The Senate felt like a group of cats being kindly petted by a man holding a knife just case. That's when the conspiracy began forming. A loose alliance of senators with three common traits: bruised egos, declining influence, and a strong belief that everything would be fine if they simply removed Caesar from the equation. This belief required optimism so powerful it deserved its own shrine. They convinced themselves they were heroes, liberators, guardians of the Republic. In reality, they were overconfident aristocrats, terrified of the fact that Rome's most capable leader wasn't them. The Senate told themselves they were saving Rome from tyranny. But deep down, many were saving Rome from something far scarier to their pride: a future in which Caesar succeeded without them. Every great political disaster needs a project manager. And for Caesar's assassination, that role fell to Gaius Cassius Longinus, a man fueled by principle, ambition, and an impressive amount of personal resentment. If Caesar was the sun, Cassius was the guy standing in the shade, muttering, "It's too brightened, I hate it." Cassius was not a fan of Caesar, not a casual critic, not a passive-aggressive colleague. He detested Caesar with the intensity of a man who had been outshone 1-2 many times at staff meetings. Some of this hatred came from ideology. Cassius claimed he was defending the Republic. Some came from pride. Caesar's rise made Cassius look like a supporting character, but a surprising amount came from jealousy. Cassius genuinely believed he was the better general, the better politician, and probably the better dinner guest. Unfortunately for him, history disagreed loudly. Still, Cassius possessed something dangerous: intelligence. He wasn't the strongest senator, nor the most popular, but he had the one talent every conspiracy needs: the ability to recruit people who will actually do the dangerous parts. Cassius could walk into a room of anxious nobles and walk out with 3 new volunteers. And a rough timeline for regime change. He began quietly, assembling a coalition of senators who shared 2 things: fear of Caesar and high self-esteem. This was easier than you'd think. Caesar's popularity had created a long list of men who felt overshadowed. Cassius tapped into that insecurity like a professional, motivational speaker. Instead of inspiring them to follow their dreams, he inspired them to participate in politically motivated homicide. But Cassius knew something crucial. The conspiracy needed legitimacy. It needed a face the public respected. It needed Brutus. Marcus Junius Brutus was descended from the man who overthrew Rome's. If Brutus joined the cause, the conspiracy would transform from a grumpy aristocrat stabbing club into a noble crusade. So Cassius courted Brutus relentlessly, complimenting his virtue, praising his wisdom, and subtly suggesting that Caesar might be a little too kingly for comfort. Cassius was basically the world's first political influencer, sliding into Brutus' DMs with messages like, "Hey, want to help save Rome?" Cassius didn't invent the conspiracy. He organized it. He branded it. He gave it purpose. Without Cassius, Caesar might have lived longer. With Cassius, the Senate had a plan: reckless, dramatic, and doomed in the long run, but a plan nonetheless. If Cassius was the brain of the conspiracy, then Marcus Junius Brutus was the moral window dressing, the decorative fig leaf meant to hide the fact that the assassination was mostly driven by ego, fear, and severe professional jealousy. Brutus didn't join the plot because he was ruthless. He joined because everyone kept telling him he should. Brutus was intelligent, philosophical, and idealistic, a man who quoted Plato while other senators were still arguing about seating arrangements. His reputation for virtue was so strong that people assumed he woke up each morning glowing faintly with civic righteousness. If Rome held a poll for most likely to die for the Republic, Brutus would have won in a landslide. Cassius knew all this and exploited it like a marketing executive. He needed Brutus not because Brutus was a brilliant strategist. He wasn't. But because Brutus's presence made everything look respectable. If Brutus said, "Yes, let's stab the dictator," then surely it must be the noble thing to do. And poor Brutus, he actually believed that. He wrestled with the decision endlessly. On one hand, Caesar had shown him affection, friendship, and political support. On the other, Brutus was descended from Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who helped expel Rome's last king. In Roman politics, family legacy was practically a second spine, and Brutus carried his like a burden. Everywhere he went, people whispered, "Your ancestors saved the Republic." So, what are you doing? Cassius leaned into this pressure with the subtlety of a battering ram. He told Brutus Rome was on the edge of monarchy. He hinted that Caesar viewed him as a son. And then he posed the most dangerous rhetorical question in history. What would your ancestor think of your silence? That did it. Brutus convinced himself that killing Caesar wasn't personal, it was patriotic. He framed it as a philosophical duty, a moral obligation, a civic sacrifice. It sounded noble, until you remembered that Caesar trusted him, loved him, and never saw the betrayal coming. Nobility is a messy business. When Brutus finally joined, the conspiracy transformed overnight. Senators who had hesitated suddenly committed. Others who weren't sure if stabbing their leader was appropriate suddenly decided, if Brutus thinks it's fine, it must be fine. Brutus didn't give the conspiracy strength. He gave it credibility. He gave it theater. He gave it tragedy. And in doing so, he guaranteed that Caesar's death would echo through history, not as a political assassination, but as the ultimate betrayal. History is full of moments where the universe gently suggests, maybe don't go outside today. The Ides of March was one of those moments. And Julius Caesar, he treated every warning sign like an optional tutorial he didn't feel obligated to complete. Let's start with the omens, and there were many. Strange storms, unnatural animal behavior, mysterious visions, and prophets muttering ominous lines like, "Beware the Ides of March." When someone hires a professional soothsayer, and the soothsayer literally warns them about a specific date, the reasonable response is to stay home, order takeout, and avoid Senate meetings entirely. But Caesar was not a reasonable man. Then came Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, who had a nightmare so terrifying she practically catapulted him out of bed, telling him not to leave the house. In the dream, she saw their home collapsing, blood running through the streets, and Caesar dying in her arms, a perfectly normal Tuesday in Rome. Except this time she felt certain it meant something. She begged him to cancel his appearance at the Senate. She pleaded. She threatened. She used what scholars now call classic wife logic. And for a moment, Caesar listened. He stayed home. He agreed the omens were concerning. He even told his officials he wouldn't be attending the Senate that day. Then Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, arrived to ruin everything. With the confidence of a man actively participating in important villainy, Decimus told Caesar that the Senate would interpret his absence as weakness, that staying home over a bad dream would make him look ridiculous, and that the senators were ready to honor him. Caesar, who never met a compliment he didn't enjoy, found this argument far more appealing than supernatural warnings and his wife's very reasonable fear. So he changed his mind again. He stepped outside, ignoring the prophets, ignoring Calpurnia, ignoring the sheer density of omens Rome had generated in the past 12 hours. One friend even tried to hand him a written warning detailing the assassination plot. Caesar, in a masterpiece of tragic irony, stuck it in his pile of letters to read later. Spoiler, he would not. Everything in Rome screamed, Julius, do not go to the Senate meeting today. And Caesar responded with, let me just check one thing real quick. The Ides of March wasn't fated, it was preventable. But Caesar chose pride over caution, politics over safety, and public image over intuition and history. Watching from the sidelines, quietly prepared the most famous plot twist of the ancient world. The morning of the Ides of March should have been suspicious from the start. Julius Caesar headed toward the Theater of Pompeii building, named after the man he defeated in the Civil War. This was already a bad vibe. Imagine attending a meeting in a conference room dedicated to your ex-rival, whom your employees accidentally eliminated. That's not a location. That's foreshadowing. As Caesar approached, a crowd gathered, trying to hand him letters and petitions. One of those letters contained a detailed warning about the assassination plot. Caesar, being extremely efficient in all areas except reading important documents on time, tucked it away like spam mail and promised himself he'd check it later. Spoiler, he would not. Inside the theater, the conspirators assembled with the energy of students who did not prepare for their group presentation but are committed to pretending they did. They had rehearsed the basics: surround Caesar, distract him, stab dramatically. But no one rehearsed what to do if he fought back, yelled, or attempted to leave. The plan had enthusiasm, not structure. When Caesar entered, the senators rose to greet him. Brutus and Cassius exchanged nervous glances. Several conspirators clutched their concealed daggers so tightly they were probably leaving dents. Caesar took his seat, blissfully unaware he was sitting in the ancient equivalent of a poorly planned murder escape room. To initiate the attack, they needed a distraction. Enter Julius, cameraman, whose acting skills could be generously described as community theater level. He handed Caesar a petition, and then tugged Caesar, snapped at him, annoyed. Meanwhile, the other conspirators closed in, forming a tight circle. This is the moment where Caesar should have looked around and said, "Why is everyone standing within stabbing range?" But, alas, he trusted these men. He had pardoned most of them. He had promoted some. He had even dined with them. Trust, unfortunately, is the leading cause of dramatic historical DOWNFALLS. As the circle tightened, whispers grew, hands shifted, and shifty eyes darted. If anyone in the room had been paying attention, the entire setup looked about as natural as a pack of wolves trying to casually stand around a sheep. The meeting was no meeting at all. It was an ambush disguised in political ceremony, and Caesar, confident, unprotected, and surrounded, sat in the center of it, like a man about to learn the world's most painful lesson in workplace safety. The plan was simple: surround Caesar, create a distraction, and then deliver the first stab quickly and cleanly. Unfortunately, the conspirators did not account for one crucial variable: Publius Ceruleus Casca. The man assigned to make the first move was absolutely terrible at being an assassin. Casca stepped behind Caesar, dagger hidden inside his toga, the weight of history resting on his shoulders. He had one job: stab the most powerful man in Rome. You'd think he'd aim for something important: heart, lungs, anything medically meaningful. Instead, he panicked and stabbed Caesar in the shoulder, the ancient equivalent of poking someone with a fork and shouting, "Aha!" Caesar reacted exactly as anyone would. He whipped around, grabbed Casca's arm, and yelled the Roman version of, "What do you think you're doing?" This was not how assassinations were supposed to go. Casca, now fully aware of how bad he was at murder, screamed for help in the least intimidating way possible. "Brother, help!" This was the signal. The other conspirators lunged into action. Daggers out, suddenly committed to the group project in a way they hadn't been during the planning meetings. Chaos erupted instantly. Chairs tipped over, togas tangled. Senators who weren't part of the plot fled the room at a speed that would impress Olympians. Caesar fought back fiercely. Despite being unarmed and surrounded, he was still a battle-hardened general who had personally faced armies, pirates, and an entire senate full of critics. He wasn't going down quietly. He grabbed Casca's dagger, shoved another attacker away, and shouted at them like a disappointed father scolding children for misbehaving. But the conspirators kept coming. Daggers flashed, arms swung. Nobody, It was less coordinated assassination and more chaotic group panic with sharp objects. The attack quickly turned into a frenzy. Caesar stood, stumbled, tried to escape. He saw familiar faces among his attackers, men he had pardoned, men he had trusted, men he had elevated. Each new blow deepened both his wounds and his disbelief, and all because Casca couldn't aim. The assassination was supposed to be decisive, elegant, symbolic. Instead, it looked like a mob attacking a celebrity at a poorly supervised fan meet and greet. The real emotional devastation was still moments awaiting, in the form of one man Caesar never expected to see among the conspirators, in the middle of the chaotic, dagger-swinging disaster that Casca had proudly launched. Julius Caesar was still fighting for his life, dodging blows, grabbing wrists, shouting at senators who had never been this energetic in any Senate debate. But then, through the blur of motion, he saw a familiar face step forward. Marcus Junius Brutus. The sight of Brutus among the attackers hit Caesar harder than any stab wound up until that moment. This wasn't personal, chaotic, treacherous, wildly unprofessional. Yes, but not personal. Brutus was someone Caesar deeply trusted, possibly loved, and certainly protected. He had forgiven him after Pompey's war. He had promoted him. He had treated him like a son, whether biologically or symbolically. So when Brutus raised his dagger, something inside Caesar broke before his body did. The ancient sources disagree on Caesar's last words. Some say he spoke in Greek, some say Latin, others say he said nothing at all. But the iconic line, "Et Brute," survives because it captures the emotional truth better than any historian could. Not, "How dare you?" Not, "Traitor." Not, "Security really failed today, but you too." A simple, devastating recognition that the betrayal was total. Dry humor aside, it was the ancient Roman equivalent of discovering your best friend joined a group chat created specifically to complain about you. Once Caesar saw Brutus among the conspirators, the fight drained from him. He stopped resisting. He pulled his toga over his head, part dignity, part shield, part "I'm done with this meeting." From a man who had survived shipwrecks, mutinies, civil wars, pirates, political scandals, and 10 years of non-stop combat, this surrender was shocking. But betrayal cuts deeper than steel, with Caesar no longer fighting back. The conspirators' courage surged. The daggers kept coming, clumsy, frantic, and in many cases inflicted by men who were trying to hit Caesar but hit each other when it was over. Caesar had 23 wounds, and, according to the autopsy, only one was actually fatal. The others were, historically speaking, enthusiastic participation points. Meanwhile, Brutus stood there in tragic silence, trying to convince himself this was noble, philosophical, and patriotic. But even he must have felt the weight of what he'd done, because killing Caesar didn't save the Republic. It destroyed the one person strong enough to hold it together in that moment. The conspirators thought they had freed Rome. Instead, they had created a martyr. The Republic was bleeding, and the Empire was already waking up. When the conspirators finished stabbing Julius Caesar, they expected a standing ovation. Truly, they imagined themselves marching out of the Senate chamber like heroes in a patriotic stage play, welcomed by cheering crowds, showered with gratitude, and maybe even offered complimentary triumph parades. After all, they believed they had just saved the Roman Republic from tyranny. Reality, unfortunately, did not match their expectations. The moment the deed was done, the conspirators burst out of the Senate building, shouting, "Liberty! Freedom!" as if Rome had been waiting all morning for their dramatic entrance. But instead of applause, they were met with silence, confusion, awkward staring, the kind of energy you get when someone tries to start a party and discovers no one else brought snacks. The Roman public did not trust these men. They knew Caesar. They liked Caesar. He gave them debt relief, food, games, stability, and, perhaps most importantly, results. Most senators, meanwhile, gave long speeches and raised taxes. So, when the conspirators proudly announced they had saved Rome, the people responded with the ancient Roman equivalent of, "Did we ask you to do that?" Panic spread quickly. Shops closed, doors shut. People ran indoors. Rome wasn't celebrating. Rome was bracing for civil war, because, historically, assassinating powerful men tends to have consequences. The conspirators suddenly realized they had a marketing problem. They had no plan for what came next. They hadn't even agreed on who would lead after Caesar's death. Their big strategy was essentially kill Caesar. Republic magically restored. Step 2 really needed more work. Then came the funeral. The moment that demolished any remaining hope they had. Mark Antony, a master of dramatic timing and emotional manipulation, delivered a eulogy so powerful it could have sold tickets. He showed Caesar's blood-soaked toga to the crowd, pointed at the stab holes, and insisted he wasn't angry, just disappointed. Rome erupted into grief. Then fury. The mob turned on the conspirators. Houses were burned. Statues of Caesar were adorned with flowers. People shouted for justice. They meant revenge. The liberators suddenly found themselves hiding behind locked doors, wondering how their brilliant plan had unraveled faster than a cheap toga in the rain. In killing Caesar, they didn't save the Republic. They destabilized it completely. They lit the fuse of civil war. Rome didn't gain freedom. It lost its last chance at peaceful reform. And the men who claimed to preserve the Republic had just ensured its destruction. By the time the conspirators realized their Save the Republic plan had the structural integrity of a wet papyrus scroll, it was too late. Julius Caesar was dead. Rome was furious, and the political vacuum he left behind was large enough to swallow the entire Senate whole. The conspirators had assumed that once Caesar was gone, the Republic would magically return to its golden age. Instead, Rome behaved exactly like a state that had just watched its most competent leader get stabbed 23 times by men who couldn't plan an escape route. Into this chaos stepped a quiet, calculating 19-year-old Gaius Octavius, better known as Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir. The conspirators barely noticed him at first. They thought he was a polite teenager with delicate health and no real power. Cute, adorable, harmless. This was a mistake. Octavian possessed all of Caesar's intelligence, with none of his mercy. While the conspirators were still arguing over who should speak at public meetings, Octavian was quietly building alliances, winning supporters, and taking control of Caesar's armies. He didn't shout for liberty or try to rally mobs. He simply rolled up his sleeves and began doing politics the same way Caesar did war, efficiently and with terrifying precision. Then there was Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend and veteran general. Antony wanted to avenge Caesar, seize power, and possibly drink his way through half the Mediterranean in the process. Eventually, Antony and Octavian realized they hated the conspirators more than they hated each other, so they formed an alliance known as the Second Triumvirate, essentially a legally sanctioned revenge club with state funding. Their first order of business: hunt down every last conspirator. Brutus and Cassius fled east, gathered armies, and prepared for a grand ideological showdown. Instead, they were crushed at the Battle of Philippia, defeat so total that both chose suicide over capture. The dream of a restored republic died with them. Rome no longer had liberators. It had losers, with their enemies gone. Antony and Octavian inevitably turned on each other because, apparently, Rome was allergic to peace. Their rivalry culminated in another civil war, which Octavian won decisively. Antony and Cleopatra fell, and Octavian returned to Rome as the unchallenged ruler of the Mediterranean. In 27 BCE, he renamed himself Augustus and became the first Roman emperor. The Republic was gone. The empire was born. And all because a group of ambitious senators thought 23 stab wounds would fix everything. Spoiler: it did not. The first breath you take into London is not a gentle welcome. It hits you like a wall-thick, living, impossible to ignore. The air is a stew of brewing beer, tallow smoke, horse manure, frying eels, human sweat, rotting river mud, and whatever leaked from chamber pots the night before. People who grew up here hardly noticed it. Outsiders gagged, crossed themselves, or blamed the devil. But this was London's signature scent, the price of being the busiest, loudest, fastest growing city in the kingdom. The sun rises slowly over the crooked timber houses, their upper floors leaning inward like gossiping old women. A milkmaid treads carefully around puddles of who knows what. A baker, already sweating, pulls open his shutters while yelling at a boy chasing a chicken down the lane. Across the street, a woman empties her night bucket straight into the gutter with the usual warning cry, though she barely bothers to shout it. Everyone already knows to keep their heads down, and yet, despite the filth, the city pulses with life. Street hawkers are among the first to wake. They call out their wares with practiced rhythm: hot pies, fresh pies, oyster 6 for a penny, old clothes, bring out your old rags. Their voices overlap, creating a kind of chaotic music that defines London mornings. Carts rumble across cobblestones, hauled by horses that look as tired as their owners. Apprentices sprint through, allies delivering messages. Bread or bolts of cloth-dodging dogs, drunks, and the occasional runaway pig. Every alley is a competition of speed and noise, as if the rising smoke mixes with the river fog, giving everything a soft blur that hides the city's rough edges at least until the day fully brightens. Then the truth appears, peeling paint, muddy streets, patched roofs, and signs swinging noisily in the wind. It is not beautiful, not in the gentle way countryside villages are, but it is alive, endlessly alive. This first breath of Tudor London tells you the real story. Here, survival and opportunity walk side by side. The streets may stink, the alleys may narrow, and the noise may rattle your bones, but the city is awake, and whether you are ready or not, it demands that you wake with it. If you follow the smell strong enough to guide even the blind, you eventually reach the realm of the fishmongers. Stalls cluster near the Thames and along streets close to Billingsgate, where the river's tide brings both opportunity and chaos. Here, the fish trade rules everything: the noise, the labor, the mood of the rhythm of the day before the sun rises. The stalls are already crowded with crates of wriggling eels, slippery haddock, gleaming salmon, and piles of shellfish that seem to stare back at you. The fishmongers themselves are a breed apart. Their hands are permanently scented with salt water and guts, their aprons stiff with scales, their voices loud enough to drown out church bells. They shout prices aggressively, mock rivals mercilessly, and argue with customers as if every penny is a matter of life or death. But beneath the bluster lies genuine skill. These men and women can gut a fish in seconds, identify the freshest catch by touch alone, and judge a customer's budget before a single word is spoken. Apprentices run beside them like frantic shadows, carrying baskets heavy enough to bend their backs. A single misstep, a dropped sturgeon, a cracked container of oysters, and they are met with curses, slaps, or public humiliation. Yet many rise through the ranks, because fish is one of the city's strongest currencies. Taverns rely on it, inns depend on it. Even poor households stretch a few pennies to buy salted harangue, the unofficial food of the working class. Around the stalls, the ground is forever wet. Scales cling to shoes, guts flow into trenches. Gulls swarm overhead like opportunistic thieves, ready to dive at the first unattended scrap. Cats dart between barrels, their patience rewarded by careless children or exhausted workers. The noise is relentless: sloshing water, blades clinking, traders arguing, buyers haggling. But it is not merely commerce, it is spectacle. People drift here just to watch the chaos. Housewives seeking gossip linger longer than necessary. Travelers study the stalls as if observing a strange ritual. Even nobles, disguised beneath plain cloaks, occasionally come to witness the wild theater of London's fish trade. By mid-morning, the last of the fresh catch is sold. The remainder is salted or smoked for tomorrow. The fishmongers rest their voices. Apprentices scrub the stones, and the river breeze returns, carrying with it the scent of the next tide and the promise that tomorrow's battle will begin before dawn once again. Even on days when the sun shines warmly over London, there is always a shadow that lingers in the narrow lanes. The memory and constant threat of plague, it never truly disappears. Sometimes it sleeps, other times it wakes with a fury. And when rumors begin to spread, when a child collapses, suddenly people start watching the streets for a figure. They dread more than thieves or tax collectors, the plague doctor. He appears like a grim omen wrapped in waxed leather, face hidden behind a beaked mask stuffed with herbs, vinegar-soaked sponges, and superstition. The mask's long snout makes him look like a creature from a nightmare, yet in Tudor, London, he is both feared and necessary. Children hide behind doorways. Housewives cross themselves. Shopkeepers slam shutters closed to keep death outside. The plague doctor moves slowly, deliberately, navigating alleys barely wide enough for him to pass. His wooden cane taps the stones, not just to steady him, but to poke the sick from a distance. Every sound he makes footsteps, cane taps. Rustling robes carries a warning. Death is near. Behind him might follow watchmen tasked with marking infected houses, hammering up boards to trap families inside until the disease decides their fate. Conditions are grim. Straw bedding reeks of sweat and fear. The air is heavy, stale, unmoving. Windows are small, rarely open. Rats scurry beneath floorboards and through pantries, spreading fleas that carry the invisible enemy. Even healthy families dread the doctor's arrival. An accusation of illness could mean imprisonment in one's own home, and once the boards go up, neighbors avoid the street entirely, as if the alley itself has become cursed. Yet, for all the dread they inspire, plague doctors are not magicians. Their tools, leeches, herbal mixtures, little more than hopeful guesses. Some carry pomanders filled with rosemary and lavender, believing sweet scents repel disease. Others burn pitch or sulfur, hoping smoke will cleanse the air. Their knowledge is limited, but their courage is undeniable. They walk into danger willingly, long before others dare. When the doctor leaves a house, the silence that follows is heavy. Sometimes he leaves hope, other times he leaves grief, and the residents of Tudor London, hardened though they are, whisper prayers each time he turns the corner, hoping his next visit is not to their own door. If the fishmongers provide London's smell, and the plague doctors provide its fear, then the street hawkers provide its heartbeat. From sunrise until the last glimmer of daylight fades, they fill the streets with a constant, unrelenting chorus. These sellers are the city's messengers, entertainers, marketers, and irritants all at once. They sell everything imaginable: food, trinkets, remedies, services. Gossiping, they sell it loudly. Every hawker has a signature cry. A pie seller belts out hot pies, hot beef pies, until his voice cracks. A seller of pins and needles chants in a half-singing rhythm. A woman selling lavender sprigs walks slowly, offering a moment of peace to anyone overwhelmed by the city's stench. Children selling matches or apples shout over one another, as if volume alone might conjure coins from passing pockets. The effect is a non-stop soundscape, equal parts commerce and chaos. These hawkers move like fish through London's crowded alleys. They must. Street space is a battlefield. Carriages rattle by without slowing. Butchers dump bloodied water into the gutter. Housewives jostle for room. Apprentices sprint past, carrying deliveries. A street hawker learns early that hesitation means losing both space and sales. Swift feet and loud lungs are essential survival tools. Many hawkers are women widows, single mothers, or wives supplementing their household income. They know which customers are soft-hearted, which are stingy, and which will bargain until the heavens collapse. Others are children too young for apprenticeships, yet old enough to contribute to family survival. Some are orphans who rely entirely on luck and persistence. In a city with no safety net, selling a basket of goods can mean the difference between eating dinner and going to sleep hungry. But hawkers offer more than products. They offer news. Gossip spreads through their ranks faster than plague through a rat nest. They know which noble lost money gambling, which merchant is about to wed, which tavern watered its ale, and which neighbor's daughter is secretly meeting a tailor's assistant behind the stables. If London has a secret, a hawker heard it first, Sand shouted it second. Crowded markets like Cheapside and Smithfield become theaters where hawkers battle for attention. A skilled seller can make a crowd laugh, cheer, or gasp. A clumsy one is ignored, instantly swallowed through them. London talks, and in their Christrill, stubborn and alive, you hear the true pulse of Tudor daily life. If the streets were loud, the taverns were louder. They were the beating social centers of Tudor London, where every classics except the nobility, who pretended not to eventually found its way. Step inside one of these smoky, crooked-beamed alehouses, and you'd immediately understand why the city could never be accused of being dull. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, spilled beer, burning tallow, and too many bodies packed into too little space. Ale was the lifeblood of the city. Water was unreliable, often contaminated by sewage or industrial wastes, so even children drank weak ale as casually as modern people drink water. Taverns brewed their own, each with a unique flavor ranging from pleasantly earthy to nearly undrinkable. Patrons argued passionately about which establishment served the cleanest ale, though the bar for cleanliness was laughably low. Inside, conversations overlapped like waves. Carters grumbled about taxes. Sailors bragged about storms survived. Housewives compared prices of fish and wool. Actors from the playhouses recited lines loudly in hopes of earning free drinks. Apprentices by guildmasters to spend their wages on idleness snuck in anyway, hoping not to be recognized. And in the darkest corners, deals were struck, some honest, some criminal, some merely questionable. Gambling was everywhere. Dice clattered against wooden tables. Cards slapped down with exaggerated confidence. Men lost weeks' wages in minutes, won them back in hours, and lost them again before dawn. Arguments could turn violent quickly. A thrown tankard or a drawn dagger was not uncommon. Tavern keepers kept thick staves behind the bar, not just for show, but out of daily necessity. Music was another constant. A wandering lute player might trade a ballad for supper. Groups of drunk patrons sang traditional songs so loudly the windows shivered. Even more refined establishments. But alehouses were more than entertainment. They were job exchanges, courtrooms without law, rumor mills, marriage markets, political forums, and emotional refuges. A man could mourn, celebrate, rage, confess, or forget all within the same evening. Women, too, participated more than records admit. Widows owned many taverns, and female brewers were among the most respected tradespeople in London. In these rooms, London revealed itself honestly, noisily, unfiltered, ambitiously, and endlessly thirsty, while hawkers filled the streets with noise and taverns filled them with stories. The craftsmen of Tudor London filled them with purpose. Every alley, every courtyard, every market lane echoed with the clatter of tools and the steady rhythm of skilled hands shaping the city's daily life. Carpenters, coopers, blacksmiths, weavers, glovers, and dozens more trades formed the backbone of London's economy, each protected and tightly controlled by powerful guilds. A craftsman's day began early, often before the church bells tolled. Apprentices swept floors thick with sawdust, coal dust, or scraps of leather. Masters inspected tools sharpened the night before. Journeymen hoping one day to earn the title of master prepared materials under watchful eyes. Guild rules dictated everything. How long an apprenticeship lasted, what designs were acceptable, what prices could be charged, and who was allowed to sell where. Breaking these rules meant fines, confiscated goods, or in extreme cases banishment from the trade entirely. Walk past a blacksmith's forge, and you'd hear the hammer's ringing echo long before you saw the glowing iron sparks burst like fireflies each time the hammer fell, lighting up the smith's soot-darkened face. Carpenters worked in open sheds, shaping beams for houses that leaned dangerously over the street. Weavers sat hunched over looms, their rhythmic shuttle movement sounding like the heartbeat of London's textile trade. A cooper might be assembling a barrel, his workshop thick with the smell of oak and burning pitch. Craft streets were neighborhoods unto themselves. Shoe Lane for cobblers, Pudding Lane for bakers, Ironmonger Lane for sellers of metalware. Milk Street, Bread Street, and Fish Street Hill were named quite literally. London did not waste imagination on practical matters. These areas buzzed with constant activity, a choreography of labor, performed by thousands who rarely left the boundaries of their trade. But the guild system was more than bureaucracy. It was community. Members supported one another through illness, funerals, apprenticeships, and celebrations. Feast days brought out banners, parades, and enough food to embarrass a noble household. Masters took pride in their craft, stamping their marks onto goods with as much pride as an artist signing a painting. For all its noise and strict regulation, the world of Tudor craftsmen revealed something essential. London survived not just on trade and gossip, but on countless hands, working tirelessly in workshops that rarely fell silent. Here, skill was currency and identity. If the craftsman gave London structure, the street performers gave it soul. Walk through Cheapside or across London Bridge on a busy morning, and you'd encounter a kind of open-air theater, one that required no ticket, obeyed no script, and relied entirely on the crowd's mood. Jugglers, minstrels, acrobats, ballad singers, fortune-tellers, and fire-eaters transformed ordinary lanes into stages that lived and died by applause. A lute player might stand on a corner singing a ballad about a doomed lover or an executed criminal. Londoners devoured like gossip. Children gathered first, spellbound. Adults followed, pretending not to listen as they paused just to rest their feet. A skilled singer could earn enough coins to eat well for a day. A poor singer earned ridicule, which in London often came louder than applause. Jugglers tossed knives in narrow alleys, sometimes missing by inches because their performance space doubled as a walkway for impatient butchers and rushing apprentices. Acrobats rolled and flipped in open squares, kicking up dust and drawing cheers. Some performers wore gaudy costumes copied from the playhouses. Others simply worked in whatever rags they owned. But all of them understood the same truth. In London, entertainment was survival, yet performers weren't alone on the streets. Rogues, tricksters, and pickpockets saw the crowds as their hunting grounds. A clever cutpurse could relieve 3 men of their purses during one particularly captivating juggling act. They worked in teams. One created a distraction, another slipped the purse, a third vanished into the crowd. London authorities tried to clamp down on them, but the streets provided cover, anonymity, and escape routes to twisted to map. Fortune tellers, some gifted, others complete frauds, set up small cloths-covered booths. They read palms, cast bones, murmured prophecies, and offered charms meant to ward off sickness, heartbreak, or bad luck at sea. Housewives sought their guidance. Young men laughed at them, then quietly returned for advice before a risky gamble. Even serious merchants paid for omens before major transactions. The boundary between superstition and belief blurred easily in a city where plague and fire always lurked. Then there were the storytellers, standing atop barrels or crates. They recited heroic sagas, foreign tales, or scandalous rumors. In a city where literacy was limited, these storytellers served as newspapers, historians, comedians, and preachers, all rolled into one together. Performers and rogues turned London streets into an unpredictable stage where every corner held the possibility of a show or a scam. If there was one place where the whole of Tudor London collided, rich, poor, honest, crooked, was the markets, Smithfield, Cheapside, Leadenhall, Billingsgate. Dozens of smaller squares served as the city's open stomach. Here, every household's daily struggle played out in full view, wrapped in the smells of raw meat, fresh bread, damp wool, spices, sweat, and the occasional unfortunate goat that refused to behave. Markets were not quiet affairs. They were storms that never ended. Butchers hacked through carcasses with enough force to make children jump. Bakers shouted the day's prices before their loaves cooled. Poulterers waved live chickens like arguments. Women selling eggs hissed warnings at anyone who reached too roughly. And always there were the bells, church bells, handbells, warning bells, the constant metallic heartbeat of the city. Navigating the market required strategy. Housewives knew which stalls arrived early, which cheated with rigged weights, which watered their milk, which mixed old meat with new, and which provided fair portions at fair prices. Bargaining was not optional. It was a ritual. A seller shouted a ridiculous amount. The buyer scoffed dramatically, and the performance continued until both surrendered to a number neither liked but both accepted. And then there were the smells. The fish section announced itself from blocks away. The butcher stalls smelled of warm blood and sawdust. The cheese sellers offered both heavenly aromas and unspeakable ones. Spice merchants, by contrast, created pockets of paradise: cinnamon, pepper, nutmeg, saffron, and cloves that cost more than some people earned in a week. Shoppers lingered here simply to breathe something pleasant for once. Animals wandered freely, adding to the chaos. Dogs begged for scraps. Pigs escaped with alarming frequency, squealing triumphantly as boys chased after them. Horses trampled puddles that soaked nearby skirts. Market days felt like a never-ending collision of human and animal life, each competing for space, attention, and survival. But the markets were more than commerce. They were information hubs. News spread faster here than anywhere else. A rumor whispered at one end of Cheapside could reach the opposite end in minutes. Merchants knew who was courting whom, which ships had arrived, which taxes were rumored, and which noble had disgraced himself at last night's feast. The market was not just a place to buy food. It was the center of life itself. Without it, the city would starve, not just physically, but socially. Here, London truly fed its body and its imagination. When night finally draped itself over Tudor London, the city did not fall silent. It only changed shape. The shouts of hawkers faded, the hammering of craftsmen ceased, and the jangle of market bells went quiet. But a different soundscape rose to replace them. The groans of tavern doors, the laughter spilling into alleys, the distant splash of the Thames, and the footsteps of people who preferred darkness over daylight. London after sunset was a world with its own rules, its own rhythms, and its own dangers. With daylight gone, so too went the illusion of safety. The narrow streets, crooked, uneven, poorly lit by smoky lanterns, became hunting grounds for thieves, drunkards, cut-purses, night watchmen, and people who did not want their names known. Apprentices stumbled home from taverns, singing loudly until their courage evaporated, their baskets tightly. Even seasoned merchants quickened their steps, knowing no amount of wealth could protect them from a well-hidden footpad. The night watch patrolled in pairs, carrying lanterns and long staffs, shouting warnings as they passed. Keep your fires low. No wandering, no fighting. Their authority was uneven at best. Some watchmen were brave, others lazy, and a few more likely to steal than to protect. But anyone wandering after curfew risked being hauled to the cages or fined for disorderly conduct. Taverns glowed warmly amid the darkness, spilling golden light and drunken bodies into the street inside. Arguments intensified as ale loosened tongues. Dice clattered. Songs rose. Fights erupted. Tavern keepers, used to the chaos, dealt wit. Some men slept where they fell snoring through the cold night air. Meanwhile, London's poorest settled in doorways, under stairs, or against church walls. Fires were forbidden after a certain hour, so warmth came from huddling together or from sheer endurance. Rats scurried freely, bold in the absence of daytime crowds. Cats prowled, doing their part for the city weather, thanked or not. And yet, for all the fear, there was beauty. The moon glimmered off the Thames. Candles flickered in upper windows. Laughter drifted across rooftops. Lovers whispered under archways. The city breathed differently, slower, but never asleep, because Tudor London, in all its filth, danger, opportunity, and energy, lived around the clock, and its streets, no matter the hour, always had a story to tell. A Spartan girl entered the world with no softness waiting to receive her. In most of Greece, newborn daughters were swaddled, sheltered, and taught early that their place was indoors unseen and unheard. But in Sparta, the very moment a girl took her first breath, the city claimed her. She belonged not merely to her family, but to the state itself, living investment in Sparta's future power. Her mother herself, hardened by the same expectations, did not whisper lullabies or promise a gentle childhood. Instead, she accepted a truth that every Spartan woman knew deep in her bones: only the strong were worthy of surviving here. A daughter had to grow into a mother whose body could withstand childbirth, whose spirit could endure loss, and whose courage could match that of any man who marched to war. Strength was not optional. It was a civic duty from the beginning. Her upbringing reflected this duty. Spartan nurses, famed across Greece for their toughness, shaped infants with a discipline that outsiders considered brutal. Babies were bathed in cold water to harden their bodies. They were given simple foods to train their stomachs for scarcity. They were left to cry not out of cruelty, but to teach resilience. If a child grew sickly or frail, whispers began not of pity, but of whether she would ever be of use to Sparta. Unlike Athenian girls, who were confined indoors and taught modesty. As early as speech, Spartan daughters were allowed to roam outside, exposed to sun and earth. Their bodies were not hidden behind cloth or walls. They were meant to stretch, climb, and grow sturdy. Even in infancy, they were closer to the rhythms of nature than to the dainty domestic world expected elsewhere in Greece. In this early stage of life, the foundations of the Spartan ideal were firmly laid. A girl learned unconsciously that weakness was dishonorable, that fear was taught not innate, that her purpose extended beyond her own desires. The city looked to her as future mother of warriors, future keeper of Spartan values, future speaker of the fierce words Spartan women were known for. From the moment she could crawl, she was surrounded by examples of the woman she was expected to become: confident, athletic, outspoken, and utterly loyal to Sparta. Her childhood would not soften from here. In fact, it was about to become far more intense. As soon as a Spartan girl could stand, she was expected to run not daintily, not shyly, not as a pastime, but as a foundational skill essential to her identity. In a city obsessed with physical excellence, running was more than exercise. It was a declaration that her body would grow fast, strong, and disciplined, capable of bearing the next generation of warriors without faltering. Training often began in open fields outside the city, where the earth was hard and the sun unforgiving. Girls ran barefoot, feeling each stone and root beneath their feet. Spartan instructors believed this hardened the soles, strengthened the tendons, and sharpened awareness. A girl learned quickly that to stumble was to fall behind, and falling behind meant being called out loudly and without mercy. Spartan society did not coddle its sons, and it certainly did not coddle its daughters. These runs weren't short dashes. They were long, grueling distances meant to build endurance. Instructors pushed the girls to keep pace with one another, sometimes even with boys their age. Outsiders were scandalized by this. The idea of girls sweating openly, racing publicly, competing visibly, it contradicted everything the rest of Greece believed about female behavior. But Sparta didn't care. it needed strong bodies, not modest reputations. Running also taught coordination and discipline. Girls learned to breathe in patterns, to conserve energy on uphill slopes, to shift weight smoothly around obstacles. The training turned them into efficient, powerful mover-straits, admired by Spartan men and envied by foreign observers. Some visiting Greeks claimed Spartan girls ran with the confidence of hunters, not maidens. They weren't wrong. Beyond the physical benefits, running built something deeper: mental endurance. A Spartan girl learned not to quit simply because her legs ached or her lungs burned. She learned to push through pain, to treat discomfort as a temporary inconvenience rather than a barrier. This mindset would follow her into adulthood, into childbirth, and into the daily pressures of Spartan life. By the time she reached adolescence, running felt as natural as breathing. Her stride was long, her back straight, her senses sharp. She could outrun many boys her age and nearly all women from other Greek cities. And as she raced across the dusty plains or along the riverbanks, she carried with her a silent truth Sparta understood well: a strong woman made a strong city. If running built endurance, wrestling built dominance, and nothing about Spartan girls shocked the rest of Greece more than this. They wrestled publicly, fiercely, and without hesitation to other Greek cities, especially Athens. The idea was outrageous. Women were expected to be modest, gentle, and unseen. Yet, in Sparta, girls grabbed, grappled, pinned, and threw one another to the ground with skill that would make grown men blink. Training took place in the palestra, the same wrestling grounds boys used. There were few concessions for gender. Girls practiced holds, escapes, and throws under the hot sun, their bodies dusted with sand, their hair tied back for efficiency rather than beauty. Spartan instructors taught them how to shift their weight, how to unbalance an opponent, how to use momentum rather than brute force. Wrestling wasn't sloppy brawling. It was a disciplined art. The purpose was not merely sport. Sparta believed that a woman strong in body would endure childbirth more easily, raising healthier children. But beyond physical strength, wrestling forged mental resilience. A girl quickly learned how to face pressure without panic, how to fall without fear, and how to rise the moment she hit the ground. Spartan society admired people who recovered instantly from setbacks, and this training instilled that trait early. Foreign visitors claimed that Spartan girls wrestled with a boldness that bordered on scandalous. They didn't avert their eyes. They didn't apologize after a hard throw. They competed to win, and when they pinned their opponents, the watching crowd, women, men, elders, responded with pride, not disapproval. The city celebrated their strength openly. Wrestling also reinforced community bonds. Girls trained in groups, encouraging each other, challenging each other, and forming the same kind of camaraderie the boys developed in the agoge. They weren't rivals in the sense of enemies. They were partners in building the Spartan ideal. A well-executed throw was applauded. A mistake was corrected without cruelty. The goal was shared excellence. This training produced women who walked with unmistakable confidence. Their backs were straight, their strides steady, their expressions calm. They knew what their bodies could do. They weren't intimidated by physical challenge, and certainly not by foreign criticism. To the rest of Greece, it looked like madness. To Sparta, it looked like preparation. Wrestling shaped not only stronger women, but stronger mothers, stronger citizens, and ultimately a stronger state. If wrestling taught Spartan girls how to control an opponent up close, javelin training taught them how to command space from a distance. The javelin, light but deadly in skilled hands, became one of the most iconic symbols of their athletic upbringing. To the rest of Greece, the idea of girls throwing weapons even for sport was unthinkable. But in Sparta, it was another essential step toward shaping women who were physically formidable and mentally disciplined. Training usually took place in open fields beyond the city walls, where the ground stretched far enough to allow long, powerful throws. Girls learned to grip the shaft correctly, to angle it with precision, and to release it at exactly the right moment. Spartan instructors paid close attention to technique, the stance, the twist of the torso, the alignment of the shoulders. A proper throw wasn't brute strength. It was coordination, timing, and balance. The javelin practice served multiple purposes. First, it strengthened the upper body, particularly the shoulders and core, crucial for the future demands of childbirth. Spartans' philosophy connected physical strength directly to the welfare of the city. A woman who could hurl a javelin with accuracy, they believed, could better endure labor and raise sturdier children. To them, the connection was obvious. To outsiders, it was another reminder that Sparta lived by rules no one else understood. Second, javelin training fostered focus. A girl had to ignore distractions, narrow her mind to a single target, and commit fully to her movement. In a society that expected its women to speak boldly and act decisively, this kind of mental clarity was invaluable. Spartan women were famous for their sharp tongues and sharper minds, and exercises like javelin throwing cultivated this discipline long before adulthood. Competitions were common and spirited. Girls lined up to test their accuracy and distance, cheering each other on or teasing rivals. Good-naturedly. Victories were celebrated openly. Losing wasn't shameful, but failing to improve was. Spartan culture valued progress over perfection, resilience over pride. Foreign observers were astonished by the sight. Young women standing in the sunlight, muscles tensed, faces determined, launching javelins farther than some men could manage to them. It looked like a society turned upside down to Sparta. It looked exactly as it should. By mastering the javelin, a Spartan girl learned more than a skill. She internalized Sparta's belief that strength, precision, and courage belong to women just as much as to men. To an outsider, Sparta seemed obsessed only with hardness, running, wrestling, javelins, endurance. But those who looked closer discovered another layer of a Spartan girl's education: rhythm, coordination, and controlled movement through dance and music. These were not gentle entertainments or decorative accomplishments. They were tools of discipline, unity, and physical mastery woven deeply into Spartan life. From a young age, girls practiced choruses, large, synchronized group dances performed during festivals, religious ceremonies, and competitions. These dances required razor-sharp precision. Movements had to be timed perfectly. Voices had to blend harmoniously, and every participant needed the stamina to perform under the blazing sun in front of the entire city. Spartan dances were athletic, filled with leaps, turns, and powerful gestures that demanded strength rather than fragility. The purpose was twofold. First, the physicality of dance strengthened the legs, core, and posture. A Spartan girl learned to hold herself with a confidence that would terrify an Athenian matron. Grace and strength were not opposites here. They were inseparable. Every kick, every sweep of the arm, every coordinated step carved discipline into muscle and bone. Second, dance fostered unity. Spartan society valued collective excellence over individual ego in the chorus. No girl could stand out at the expense of the group. Everyone had to listen, adjust, synchronize, and contribute equally. This training prepared them for adult life where loyalty to the city and coordination within the community mattered more than personal comfort. Music was equally essential. Girls learned to keep rhythm with pipes and lyres, their voices rising together in songs that honored gods, heroes, and Sparta's military legacy. These songs were not soft lullabies. They were powerful. Often, martial meant to inspire courage and pride. At public festivals like the Gymnopedia, girls performed before crowds that included elders, warriors, and visiting foreigners. Their voices carried across the gathering steady and fearless to other Greeks. The sight was bewildering. Young women singing boldly, dancing energetically, moving with athletic grace. Athenian girls were supposed to be quiet, hidden, modest, but Spartan girls were expected to be visible living symbols of the city's strength. Through dance and music, they learned control, unity, rhythm, and presence. These performances weren't distractions from training. They were training refining the poise, stamina, and unshakable confidence that defined a Spartan woman. Physical training shaped a Spartan girl's body, but education sharpened her mind. Unlike the rest of Greece, where girls were rarely taught to read and were encouraged to speak softly, if at all, Sparta expected its daughters to be articulate, intelligent, and bold. A Spartan woman's words were as legendary as her strength, and many men from other cities admitted privately that they feared a Spartan tongue, even more than a Spartan spear. Girls were taught reading, writing, poetry, and even elements of philosophy. Their education wasn't ornamental. It was practical. They needed to understand laws, property rights, inheritance, and the responsibilities of managing estates while men were away at war. Athenian women were confined to the home. Spartan women often ran entire households, and sometimes entire fortunes. Ignorance was unacceptable. Spartan instructors encouraged open debate. A girl learned to defend her ideas, question assumptions, and speak directly without hesitation. If she mumbled or softened her voice, she was told to repeat herself louder. Confidence wasn't optional, it was trained. Elders believed that a sharp mind produced sharp decisions, which led to better children and a stronger city. This education created a cultural phenomenon the rest of Greece found shocking. Outspoken women. Spartan women were known for their biting wit and fearless comments when foreign men criticized their lack of modesty. Spartan women replied with lines that still echo in ancient texts. One famously told an Athenian woman bragging about modesty, "We are the only women who give birth to real men." These weren't idle insults. They were expressions of deeply rooted national pride. Storytelling and poetry were also important. Girls memorized heroic tales not as dreamy entertainment, but as moral lessons in courage, loyalty, and discipline. These were virtues reinforced in every verse. Songs and recitations taught rhythm, memory, and emotional control, all valuable skills in public gatherings and rituals. Education also prepared girls for leadership roles within their families and communities. Spartan women could inherit property, manage land, and oversee helot labor. Their mental training ensured they were ready for responsibilities that Greek men in other cities would never permit their wives to hold. The result was a generation of women who walked, spoke, and thought with unwavering self-assurance. Outsiders claimed Spartan girls were too bold, too confident, too free, but Sparta believed the opposite. A strong city required strong minds just as much as strong bodies. If there was any part of Spartan life that truly scandalized the rest of Greece, it was this: Spartan girls didn't train in secret. They competed in public. They ran races, wrestled, danced, and threw javelins before crowds that included men, elders, visiting diplomats, spies who carried tales back to Athens with wide eyes and a shaking head to the Greek world. Women's athletic competitions were unthinkable to Sparta. They were essential. Public festivals like the Hyacinthia and the Gymnopedia transformed the city into a grand arena. Girls marched out, confidently hair loose, or braided, wearing simple tunics that left their limbs free for movement. These garments shocked outsiders who thought modesty was a virtue. Spartans, however, valued freedom of movement far more than modesty. A garment that restricted an athlete was an insult to her and to the city. The competitions were intense. In foot races, girls sprinted with long, powerful strides, kicking up dust as the crowd roared its approval. Wrestling matches were even more dramatic. A well-executed throw could ignite cheers, while a clever escape earned respect from even the sternest Spartan elders. Javelin contests tested accuracy and technique, not brute force, and girls celebrated each other's victories with a camaraderie that reflected their shared training. But these events weren't just athletic showcases. They served deeper social and political purposes. First, they reinforced the ideal that every Spartan girl, regardless of wealth or family status, was expected to embody strength. The competitions functioned as public proof of their physical excellence. Second, they prepared them psychologically for adulthood. Performing before an audience built confidence, courage, and composure under pressure. Third, the festivals acted as controlled meeting grounds for young men and women. Spartans believed that strong offspring came from strong parents who admired one another's excellence. Athletic competitions allowed potential partners to see each other at their peak, swift, fierce, determined, and unashamed. Love in Sparta began not with poetry, but with performance. Foreign visitors were stunned by the authority and freedom Spartan girls displayed. Athenians whispered that Spartan women were immodest or out of control, but beneath the criticism lay something else. These girls moved with a confidence rarely seen anywhere else in Greece. The competitions created a public culture of strength, reminder that Spartan women weren't hidden figures. Behind closed doors, they were visible, formidable, and essential to the identity of the state. By the time a Spartan girl reached adulthood, her training had shaped her into something the rest of Greece barely recognized: a woman unafraid to meet any eye, unashamed of her body, confident in her strength. and fully aware of her responsibilities. Marriage in Sparta did not mark the beginning of her duties. It marked the continuation of everything she had trained for since childhood. While other Greek brides were sheltered, veiled, and instructed to be obedient, Spartan women entered marriage like athletes entering a new arena. Spartan marriages were unusual from the start. Courtship wasn't a matter of quiet glances or poetic exchanges. Young men admired women for their athleticism, wit, and boldness. Strength was attractive. Intelligence was admired. Confidence was expected. Some sources even describe mock abductions, symbolic rituals that emphasized the transition into adulthood. But these were far from the timid ceremonies of Athens. Once married, a Spartan woman assumed a role central to the city's survival, producing strong children. This expectation wasn't hidden or softened. It was spoken openly, repeatedly, bluntly. A Spartan mother was celebrated when she bore healthy sons who would become warriors, but she was equally respected for raising resilient daughters who would continue the same tradition. The pressure was intense, but so was the honor. Spartans believed that the fate of the entire state rested partly in the hands and bodies of its women. Childbirth was viewed almost as a warrior's trial. A woman who had run long distances, wrestled opponents, thrown javelins, and trained her body from infancy was expected to endure labor with endurance and courage. The pain was not minimized. It was embraced as proof of strength. Stories circulated of women rebuking those who cried out, to loudly urging them to remember their training. But motherhood in Sparta did not trap women within the household. Spartan women had unusual legal and economic freedoms. They could inherit property, manage estates, and oversee large households while their husbands served in the army full-time. Their education prepared them for this independence. Foreigners accused them of having too much power, but to Spartans, such authority was practical and necessary. A Spartan mother did not cradle her child with softness alone. She instilled fearlessness, discipline, and loyalty to the state. Her lullabies were not gentle fantasies. They were promises that her children would grow into the strength she had been trained to embody by adulthood. The training of Spartan women had produced a figure so distinct, so unconventional, that the rest of Greece didn't quite know what to do with her. To Athenians, she was loud, unfeminine, and shockingly free. To Corinthians, she was dangerously persuasive. To poets, she was an anomaly, neither the soft domestic figure they were used to praising, nor the withdrawn maiden they expected to see behind closed doors. But to Sparta, she was the backbone of the state. The presence of strong women shaped Spartan culture in ways that outsiders found both admirable and unsettling. A Spartan woman could stand before elders and speak boldly. She could rebuke a coward, praise a hero, and command the respect of soldiers. Her training had taught her that her voice mattered, that her judgment had weight, and that courage was not a masculine trait, but a Spartan one. Foreign ambassadors often commented that Spartan women ruled their men. Spartans laughed at this. Women did not rule. They enforced standards. A coward returning from battle could not hide behind excuses. Mothers were known to greet survivors with cutting words. Return with your shield door on it. It wasn't cruelty. It was a cultural duty. A Spartan woman upheld the expectations she herself lived by: endurance, loyalty, strength, and honor, even in everyday life. Their presence shaped the city because they controlled large amounts of property. They influenced the economy because they raised children with independence and discipline. They shaped the next generation because they were educated. They could debate, advise, and challenge ideas. Their athletic training gave them health and longevity, making them visible in public life far more than women elsewhere in Greece. To outsiders, this visibility was nearly scandalous. They accused Spartan women of arrogance, immodesty, and excessive power. Yet beneath the criticism lay envy. Other Greek cities recognized that Sparta's strength rested not only on its warriors, but on the women who produced and raised them. Strong mothers created strong sons and even stronger daughters. The legacy of Spartan women endured long after the city's military faded. Historians recorded their sayings, their confidence, their physical prowess, and their roles in shaping one of the most disciplined societies the ancient world had ever seen. Their training was not merely athletic, it was cultural, psychological, and political. In the end, what truly terrified Greece was not that Spartan women were strong, it was that Sparta believed women's strength was essential. Illyrian nobility built its power on something older than iron weapons, older even than their fortified hilltop settlements. Lineage. A noble family's authority did not come from elections, decrees, or written law. It came from blood ancestry, stretching back to legendary founders, warrior kings, and sea raiders whose exploits were retold beside hearthfires for generations. To be born into an Illyrian aristocratic clan was to inherit a story, a duty, and a claim to rule. And every noble family guarded that claim with fierce, almost ritualistic pride. Their homeland, rugged mountains, thick forests, and a jagged coastline facing the Adriatic shaped them as much as their ancestry did. But from hill forts known as gradina, stone strongholds perched high enough to watch over valleys, trade routes, and rival tribes within these walls, noble families lived in extended households, surrounded by warriors, craftsmen, seers, and servants who reinforced their status. Trade enriched them even further. The Adriatic Sea turned Illyrian nobles into intermediaries between the Greek colonies to the south and the continental interior to the north. Ships filled with amber from the Baltic, tin and iron from the Alps, and pottery, wine, and luxury goods from Corinth and Athens moved through Illyrian-controlled routes. The clans who controlled the ports and mountain passes controlled the wealth, and wealth in Illyria translated directly into influence. Marriage alliances cemented political power. A union between two aristocratic houses was not a romantic affair. It was a contract woven through diplomacy, war, and inheritance. Daughters were prized for the alliances they could forge, while sons were raised from childhood to defend the clan's honor with spear and shield. Feasts, rituals, and negotiations all revolved around ensuring that the bloodline remained unbroken and unchallenged. Foreign observers, especially Greeks, described Illyrian nobles as both fierce and extravagant. They looked like warriors, but dressed like kings. They commanded mountain tribes, yet traded with distant cultures. Their authority, though unwritten, was absolute. The people obeyed because the nobles embodied the identity of the clan itself in this world. Lineage was not merely a record of names. It was a living force, and proclaimed in every public gathering. Any noble family ruled because its ancestors had conquered, traded, negotiated, and survived. Their blood was their throne. To understand Illyrian nobility, you must climb. Their power did not sit in open plains or coastal capitals, but on rugged heights where stone walls crowned the mountaintops. These fortified settlements, known as gradina, served as both homes and symbols of dominance. From their heights, aristocratic families watched everything. Trade routes winding through the valleys, herds moving across hillside pastures, and rival clans daring to trespass on contested borders. A gradina was not a palace in the polished Greek sense. It was a fortress, a statement of endurance against wind, war, and time itself. Massive dry stone walls encircled the upper terrace, built with such precision that many still stand centuries later. Inside were clusters of rectangular houses, storage pits, smithing workshops, and ceremonial spaces. At the highest point, always the highest, stood the residence of the noble clan. It was larger, sturdier, and positioned so every visitor saw exactly who ruled this mountain. Life inside these hill forts revolved around the aristocratic household. Warriors trained in the courtyards, their shields catching the morning light. Craftsmen produced weapons, jewelry, and prestige objects destined for noble use or diplomatic exchange. Herdsmen arrived from the lower valleys, bringing tribute in livestock. Priests or seers performed rituals near sacred stones or altars, calling on ancestors or mountain gods to protect the settlement. A gradina was also a diplomatic hub. Foreign traders, Greeks, Etruscans, Venetians made the climb to present goods, negotiate alliances, or secure safe passage. They arrived carrying wine, decorated pottery, and fine textiles, and they left with amber, slaves, metal, or the right to access Illyrian-controlled trade routes. Every negotiation reinforced the noble family's central role. Nothing moved through Illyrian territory without their blessing. The placement of these hill forts was strategic, visible from afar. They acted as territorial markers and deterrents. A rival clan thinking of raiding would see the fort's height, the thickness of its walls, and the armed figures moving atop the manned think twice. Strength announced itself through stone long before swords were drawn. For the nobles who lived there, the gradina was more than home. It was identity. Each wall carried the memory of ancestors who had defended it. Each stone symbolized continuity in Illyria. To rule from above wasn't a metaphor, it was literal. The higher you lived, the more power you commanded. If Illyrian nobles ruled the mountains, they enriched themselves through the sea. The Adriatic was not just a body of water to them, it was a highway of opportunity, a glittering corridor that connected their rugged homeland to the wealthy worlds of Greece, Italy, and the distant north. Controlling the coast meant controlling the flow of goods, and Illyrian aristocrats mastered this with a sharpness that impressed even their rivals. Noble clans oversaw harbors tucked between rocky inlets, where sleek wooden ships, some Illyrian, some foreign loaded and unloaded cargo under watchful eyes. They negotiated directly with Greek merchants who sailed from Corinth, Apollonia, or Syracuse, men who quickly learned that Illyrian chieftains were shrewd, calculating traders. These were not simple barbarians, as some Greek writers claimed. They understood value, leverage, and the power of scarcity. Amber washed down ancient trade routes from the Baltic, passed through Illyrian hands on its way to wealthy Greek buyers. So did precious metals from inland mines, fine livestock, salt, timber, and slaves captured in raids or purchased from neighboring tribes in return. Nobles acquired wine, olive oil, fine textiles, bronze vessels, painted pottery, and decorative armor goods that elevated their prestige and tran. At coastal strongholds, the aristocracy acted as gatekeepers. Nothing entered or left without their approval, and every exchange strengthened their political authority. A noble family that controlled the harbor became indispensable not only to their own tribe but to foreign powers seeking stable trade routes. Greek colonies depended on Illyrian cooperation. Etruscan traders courted their favor. Even early Roman envoys understood the importance of maintaining good relations with these coastal rulers. But trade was not always peaceful. Pirates roamed the Adriatic, some fully independent, others operating under the protection or silent approval of Illyrian nobles. A clan might shelter pirate crews in exchange for a share of profits, strengthening their economy while undermining rival ports. The Greeks complained bitterly about this, but they still came to trade. The wealth was worth the risk. Through the Adriatic, Illyrian aristocrats transformed themselves from isolated mountain warlords into elites with international influence. Their ships carried more than goods. They carried status, connections, and opportunities. A noble family's power, once rooted in blood and stone, now extended across the sea's shifting blue horizon. If you wanted to recognize an Illyrian noble at a glance, you didn't look for crowns or royal robes. Looked for the gleam of precious materials that spoke a silent but unmistakable language of status. Prestige in Illyria was displayed not through architectural grandeur as in Greece but through personal adornment. Jewelry crafted from gold, amber, glass, bronze, and imported luxury items signaled the clan's wealth and far-reaching connections. Gold was the favorite medium of the aristocracy. Smiths shaped it into spiral bracelets, heavy torques, delicate earrings, and intricate fibulae that fastened cloaks with both elegance and authority. Some pieces were astonishingly detailed, featuring animal motifs, deer, rams, serpents that echoed the spiritual and mythic world of the Illyrians. Wearing such items was not an act of vanity. It was a declaration. Gold announced bloodline, heritage, and political power. Amber, however, carried a different meaning. Sourced from distant northern lands and transported through long, dangerous trade routes, amber was rarer and more mysterious. Illyrian nobles prized it not only for its beauty but for its symbolic connection to distant realms. Many believed it contained protective or magical properties. Necklaces of polished amber beads often accompanied noblewomen, while warriors sometimes carried amber talismans into battle or burial. The presence of amber in a household signaled a clan's participation in long-distance trade networks and, therefore, its importance. Glass beads imported from Greek or Phoenician workshops added brilliant color to noble attire. Their vivid blues, greens, and reds caught the sunlight during ceremonies and feasts, drawing the eye and marking the elite from the common. Bronze mirrors and decorated pins completed the ensemble, turning the human body into a living display of wealth, diplomacy, and cultural identity. These objects were not worn casually. They appeared during rituals, feasts, negotiations, and processions moments. When a noble family needed to project authority, even enemies recognized the power of such displays. A richly adorned Illyrian noble signaled a clan capable of commanding warriors. Wealth and alliances. Archaeologists today often discover these prestige items in graves, where they continue to tell stories of status long after their owners return to the earth. Each bracelet, bead, and brooch reflects the sophistication of Illyrian craftsmanship and the peace aristocracy's desire to preserve its identity through objects as enduring as stone, through gold and amber. Illyrian nobles didn't just decorate themselves, they proclaimed who they were. For all their wealth, Illyrian nobles never let anyone forget that their lineage was rooted in war. Prestige wasn't just displayed in jewelry and imported finery. It radiated from the weapons and armor they wore, especially the ceremonial helmets that became some of the most iconic symbols of Illyrian elite culture. These helmets, often crafted from bronze with a distinctive elongated shape, were not merely military equipment. They were declarations of authority, heiresses of clans, and markers of a noble's right to lead. Some helmets featured ornate crests, repousse decoration, or stylized animal motifs. Others displayed polished surfaces meant to catch the sun on parade days, reflecting light like a beacon. A noble adorned with such a helmet was not just a warrior, but a representative of his ancestors. Each strike of the hammer during crafting echoed generations of battles fought in the mountains and valleys of Illyria. These helmets were rarely worn in casual combat. Appeared during ceremonies, feasts, diplomatic gatherings, and burial rites. When worn by living nobles, they symbolized readiness for war. When placed on the heads of the deceased, they served as reminders of status, lineage, and valor. Burial sites often contain helmets that had been intentionally bent or killed to accompany their owner to the afterlife, ensuring that their prestige could not be claimed by another. Alongside the helmets were shields, decorated with geometric motifs, bronze greaves, and spears with leaf-shaped blades, objects that blended practical craftsmanship with symbolic meaning. The noble class viewed martial identity as inseparable from political authority. A leader had to be a warrior first, diplomat second. To rule without the ability to defend one's clan would have been unthinkable. These ceremonial arms also served a psychological purpose. They projected intimidation. Greek envoys recorded their encounters with Illyrian chiefs who received them wearing full warrior regalia, standing tall beneath helmets that glinted like fire. Whether or not a battle was imminent did not matter. The message was always the same. This is a house of warriors and its power is inherited, not negotiated. For the Illyrian elite, military symbols were not merely accessories, they were the foundation of legitimacy, even in times of peace. A noble's identity was defined by the weapons he bore, the armor he displayed, and the ancestral tradition that demanded courage from every generation. If jewelry and weapons displayed Illyrian noble status visually, feasts and rituals displayed it socially. Prestige wasn't just something worn, it was performed, and nowhere was this more evident than in the great gatherings held within hill forts where aristocratic families showcased their wealth, reinforced alliances, and enacted traditions older than recorded history. A noble feast was not simply a meal, it was a demonstration of abundance and power. Long wooden tables groaned beneath roasted game, cheese wheels, smoked fish, honey cakes, herbs, an amphory of imported wine, and nobles took pride in presenting wild boar, stag, or bear animals whose capture symbolized mastery over the natural world. Guests knew that every dish sent a message. This clan controls land, labor, and prosperity. Music and storytelling accompanied the feast. Flutes and percussion instruments created rhythmic soundscapes, while bards recited tales of heroic ancestors or legendary battles. These performances weren't mere entertainment, they were tools of memory reinforcing the legitimacy of a clan's lineage. Noble families' history was constantly spoken aloud so that it could never be forgotten or challenged. Ritual drinking was another essential component. Drinking vessels made from bronze, silver, or elaborately carved horn circulated through the hall. To drink from a noble's cup symbolized acceptance, loyalty, or diplomatic recognition. Foreign guests were honored by being offered the best vessels, often decorated with spirals, animal figures, or geometric Illyrian motifs. Ceremony blended seamlessly with politics. Alliances were negotiated under the guise of hospitality. Marriages were discussed between bites of roasted meat. Boasts, challenges, and oaths were exchanged before witnesses. Prestige became a performance and every attendee understood the stakes. Rituals accompanying these feasts added layers of spiritual meaning. Priests invoked the ancestors or mountain gods, offering libations and calling for protection over the clan. Young warriors might be presented with weapons, symbolizing their passage into adulthood. Noble women played crucial roles, too, offering libations, blessing alliances, and managing the household logistics that made such gatherings possible. Foreign observers remarked on the intensity of Illyrian feasts. What struck them most was not extravagance, but energy. An atmosphere thick with pride, rivalry, and ancestral presence. These gatherings served as the political engine of aristocratic life, binding families to one another through shared ritual and shared spectacle. Among the Illyrian elite, power wasn't quiet. It was sung, toasted, displayed, and remembered, while warrior chieftains often dominate the stories of Illyria. Noble women formed the backbone of aristocratic power. Their influence flowed, quietly but decisively, through every sphere of elite life: inheritance, diplomacy, ritual, household management, and the preservation of lineage. Far from the secluded domestic roles expected in Greek city-states, Illyrian noble women operated with remarkable visibility and authority. A noble woman's first responsibility was lineage. Identity ran through the family tree and women safeguarded it through marriage alliances, inheritance, negotiations, and the raising of heirs. Their marriages were strategic events, orchestrated to bind powerful clans together. But unlike in many ancient societies, Illyrian noblewomen were not passive participants. Archaeological evidence, lavish jewelry, rich grave goods, and high status burials indicates that they retained significant personal wealth. Their jewelry, often made from gold and amber, announced their status as clearly as weapons announced a man's. Some grave sites even contain weapons buried with noble women, suggesting roles in defense or symbolic participation in the warrior identity of their clans. Most importantly, noble women shaped the next generation of leaders. They raised sons to be warriors and daughters to be political assets, teaching them clan history, expectations, and alliances. The continuity of aristocratic power depended on their wisdom. A clan with a strong matriarch was considered stable. One without her was vulnerable. To the Greeks, Illyrian noble women seemed bold, extravagant, and unusually free. They were indispensable pillars of aristocratic society, keepers of wealth, guardians of tradition, and architects of continuity. If everyday life revealed Illyrian noble status through jewelry, armor, and ritual, their burials revealed something far deeper. The worldview of a people who believed prestige should follow a person into eternity. Aristocratic tombs were not mere resting places. They were declarations of power, identity, and spiritual continuity. Each burial mound, stone chamber, or richly furnished grave communicated the same message. This was no ordinary life. Illyrian nobles were often interred in tumuli, large earthen mounds built to dominate the landscape. Some stood alone, others formed clusters, marking the cemeteries of powerful clans. These mounds were deliberately conspicuous, visible from far-off valleys or from ships approaching the coast. Their very presence reinforced ancestral claims to territory. Inside the tomb, the grave goods spoke louder than any inscription. Weapons were common even for women: swords, spears, daggers, and beautifully decorated shields symbolized family's warrior heritage. These items were often ritually killed, bent, or broken, so they could accompany the deceased into the afterlife without being used by the living armor. Especially the distinctive Illyrian bronze helmets appeared frequently, reminding all who excavated these tombs centuries later that noble identity was inseparable from martial prestige. Yet these burials were not defined by weapons alone. Jewelry made of gold, amber, and imported coral adorned the dead, reflecting the wealth and international connections of Illyrian elites. Amber beads gleamed like drops of ancient sunlight, intricate fibulae fastened ceremonial cloaks, bronze mirrors and decorated pins emphasized beauty and status even in death. Ceramic vessels, some locally made, others imported from Corinth, Athens, or Etruria, accompanied the deceased, filled with offerings for the journey beyond. Feasting equipment, drinking cups, carved wooden bowls hinted at the social life the noble had enjoyed and was expected to continue in the afterlife. For prestige did not end with death. it transformed into legacy. Ritual practices added further meaning. Some tombs show evidence of animal sacrifices, libations, or fire rituals performed at the time of burial. These ceremonies involved the entire elite, community reinforcing social cohesion and honoring the ancestors who watched over the hill fort to outsiders. Illyrian burials appeared lavish, excessive, but to Illyrian nobles, they were essential. A burial was the final expression of a life lived with honor, wealth, and lineage. It preserved identity, not just for the living, but for generations yet to come. By the time Rome set its sights on the Adriatic, the Illyrian aristocracy had already carved its legacy into the mountains, the sea, and the memory of every tribe that lived between the Drene and the Istrian peninsula. Their rule was not built on marble or written law, it was built on lineage, metal, ritual, and the unshakable belief that prestige had to be shown, defended, and inherited. And even as their world changed, the echoes of Illyrian noble culture continued to shape the region long after their hill forts fell silent. Roman authors wrote about the Illyrians with a mixture of frustration, admiration, and fear. They described chieftains who negotiated like seasoned diplomats, warriors who fought with ferocity, and noble women whose status defied Roman expectations. Illyrian elites were not primitive barbarians. They were rivals with their own political networks and maritime ambitions. Many Illyrian noble families resisted Roman expansion fiercely. Their hill forts became strongholds of defiance. Their warriors fought with the same determination their ancestors had displayed for centuries, and their coastal fleets contested Roman control of the Adriatic. Even when Rome won, it did not erase Illyrian aristocratic culture. Instead, it absorbed elements of it. Some Illyrian nobles joined Roman ranks, becoming auxiliary commanders or governors of newly incorporated territories. Their sons served as cavalry officers. Their daughters married into Romanized families, and their ancestral wealth transformed into landholdings under Roman law. The symbols of their identity: gold jewelry, amber ornaments, ceremonial helmets continued to appear in local graves well into the Roman era, quietly resisting cultural erasure. Fascinated Roman writers, most was the Illyrian aristocracy's dual identity. These nobles were both warriors and traders, mountain lords and sea captains, guardians of ancestral rights, and participants in Mediterranean commerce. They stood at the crossroads of cultures, blending local traditions with Greek influence, and later with Roman administration. Their adaptability was not weakness, it was survival. Even today, archaeological discoveries reveal how deeply their legacy shaped the region. Hillfort ruins still watch over valleys, tumuli still rise like silent sentinels, gold spirals and amber beads still shine as brightly as they did in the hands of noble women. The Illyrian aristocracy may not have left written chronicles, they left something more enduring, material proof of a culture where prestige, power, and identity were inseparable. Their legacy did not vanish, it became the foundation upon which later kingdoms and cultures would rise.